dynamite. It is obvious that he hasn't seriously engaged with what went on behind the Iron Curtain. I wonder if he's ever sat, as I have done, with a 13-year-old East German girl who came home from school weeping. I said, "What's wrong, Esther?" She said, "Uncle John, they've just told me at school that I cannot study anymore." Why is that? Because I will not swear allegiance to the atheistic state. She'd been the top girl in the class for every year. And she told us, and we were stunned as adults to hear a 13-year-old say to us that she said to the teacher, "Sir, one day you will stand before God and answer for what you've done to me today." That side of things is left off out to the new atheist analysis. And it shows me that there's a delusion about history within atheism. And so it is very important that we learn to do what is basic to science. And it amazes me that these people who claim to be scientists don't do it. One of the first rules of scientific thought is to learn to distinguish things that differ, and to put all religions into the same box. To couple the Amish with fundamentalist Islamist terrorists is to end all possibility of debate. After all, as I pointed out to Richard Dawkins and to Christopher Hitchens, they would not like me to classify them with Stalin. All I would like them to show me is the same courtesy, that they do not classify my Christianity with fanatical and dangerous religion. Richard Dawkins expresses the opinion that all religion needs to be eliminated, even moderate religion, because moderate religion leads to fanatical religion. Well, if he believes that, he ought to stop teaching even mild atheism, because that could lead to fanatical atheism. In fact, I would suggest he might want to stop teaching Darwinism, because it was used by social Darwinists to lead to the eugenics program in the 20th century. He might even want to teach physics because it led to the atomic bomb. But so many people think faith is a delusion, following Freud. It's in the same category as faith in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. But that's very silly, ladies and gentlemen. As a child, I believed for a very short while in Santa Claus. However, I soon sussed the real situation out, although I must confess I kept my doubts about Santa's existence to myself for some time, because I also noticed there was a material advantage in keeping it that way. But I have never heard of an adult coming to believe in Santa Claus, have you? Or the Tooth Fairy. I've known many adult people come to believe in God. So there's a great difference. But it's worth asking the question, isn't it? Why is faith in the Tooth Fairy a delusion? The answer is obvious. The Tooth Fairy doesn't exist. So faith in God certainly is a delusion if God does not exist. But what if God does exist? Then it is clearly atheism that is a delusion. So the real question to ask is this: does God exist? Now this is so important, I want to put it another way. The new atheist quotes Sigmund Freud that God is a wish fulfillment, a fictional father figure projected on the sky of our imagination and created by our desire for security. On this view, heaven is an imaginary projection of our fear of extinction and death, and religion is simply a psychological escape mechanism so that we don't have to face life as it really is. Well, of course, that's all true, provided only that God does not exist. But if God does exist, exactly the same Freudian argument will show you equally convincingly that it is atheism that is the flight from reality, a projection of the desire not to have to meet God one day and give account for your life. If God does exist, then atheism can easily be seen as a psychological escape mechanism to avoid taking ultimate responsibility for one's life. And as the brilliant German psychiatrist Manfred Lutz in his recent bestseller, A Short History of the Great One, says, as to whether God exists or not, Freud can give you no help whatsoever. So the question we need to face is, does God exist? Is there evidence on which you can base your faith? Well, let me give you a short scientific perspective. Because what the new atheists don't seem to realize is that faith is involved in science. So if faith is delusional, so is science. After all, the goal of science is not to impose on the matter and workings of the universe our human sense of order, but to discover the universe's own intrinsic order and intelligibility. And that means that scientists have always had to believe, before they start, that the universe has an inherent order. If it didn't, scientific research would be pointless. The quantum behavior of elementary particles still presents questions that for the moment outstrip our reason, our intuition, and powers of imagination. The same is true of human consciousness. No one understands it, and there's no generally agreed theory. In this situation, for research to continue requires faith. Faith that nature's intelligibility and order will not peter out into unintelligible chaos. Though for all we know, we might have to get our minds around a level of intelligibility far higher than any we can presently grasp. Indeed, one can even say that faith in something that has not yet been proved still is, and it always has been, a prerequisite for scientific investigation. So if the new atheists think that faith is irrational and delusional, they will have to say that the science on which they pin all their hopes is also irrational. But now comes the question, where does that faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe come from? My professor of quantum physics at Cambridge, Professor Sir John Polkinghorne, says physics is powerless to explain its faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe for the simple reason that you cannot do any physics without believing it in the first place. So how do we know? How do I know as a mathematician that my cognitive faculties give me valid information? The first obvious thing to see is that our human reason didn't create either the universe or our own powers of reason. How can it be then that what goes on in my little tiny head can give me anything like a true account of reality? Einstein was clever enough to see the problem. The only incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible, he said. How can it be that mathematics thought up in the human mind corresponds to the working of the universe? What original authority, what reliability has a reason? Is it an instrument deliberately designed to enable us to discover and believe the truth? Now this is interesting because atheists deny any deliberate design by a creator, but they still believe that reason has a proper function. And they reveal their belief that this is the case by asserting that belief in the existence of God results from a misuse of reason. Obviously, if reason had no proper function, no one could be accused of misusing it. But as we've seen, many follow Freud's contention that all the apparently rational argument put forward by believers for the existence of God are driven and corrupted by a hidden subconscious wish fulfillment mechanism. Indeed, the new atheists now claim that religious belief comes about by a, quotes, evolutionary misfiring of something useful. But I thought that misfirings and mistakes in evolution were supposed to lead to extinction. This simply shows, ladies and gentlemen, that Dawkins has no Darwinian account for religious belief. The irony of the atheist position becomes very apparent as soon as we ask about the origin of our human faculty of reason. For atheists hold that the driving force of evolution, which eventually produced our human cognitive faculties, was not primarily concerned with truth at all, but with survival. And we all know what has generally happened and still happens to truth when individuals or commercial enterprises or nations, motivated by what Dawkins calls their selfish genes, feel themselves threatened and struggle for survival. After all, if the thoughts in my mind are just the motions of atoms in my brain, and if my brain is a mechanism that has arisen by mindless, unguided processes, why should I believe anything it tells me, including the fact that it is made of atoms? How then is it rational to believe in the theory that the evolution of our faculty of reason was not directed for the purpose of discovery